This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From custom domains to beautiful websites using their easily customizable templates that you can have up and running in minutes, e-commerce, email and email marketing, SEO, analytics, and scheduling, Squarespace does it all and has done it for us for the last 11 years. If you are a small to mid-sized business in any industry, Squarespace is the place to go for all of your website needs. Hop over to www.squarespace.com/Hugh for a free trial. And if you like what you see and want to move forward, receive 10% off your first order by using the discount code Hugh at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and welcome to another episode of From the Archives, an occasional series I've created for those of you either new to the channel or who may otherwise have missed videos we've done, of which I'm particularly fond. Today, it's a conversation Claudia and I recorded almost 8 years ago at the International Center of Photography in New York when it was on the Bowery with Agnes Sire, then the executive director of the Henrí Cartier-Bresson Foundation. This was a pivotal moment for me, not only because Cartier-Bresson is my favorite photographer of all time, not for the reasons you might assume, although that is another story for another day, but because speaking with Agnes served as an accelerant in my journey toward bearing witness. Enjoy. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and it's just the trifecta here at the International Center of Photography Museum in New York City. I am so pleased to bring to you Agnes Sire, the director of the Henrí Cartier-Bresson Foundation. Agnes, welcome.
Thank you for receiving me.
Avec plaisir. And that's it. I don't know any more French, so we're just going to make do with what we can. Well, we're here, and you're here in particular, because in 2 days, a major retrospective of Henrí Cartier-Bresson's work, based on the book Decisive Moment, the American title, which is what this represents. Now, of course, the American title is not at all what the French title was.
No.
What is that story?
The French title is Images à la sauvette, which could be translated as Images on the run, like a little seller in the streets obliged to leave because the police wants him to leave. That's how Cartier-Bresson was thinking he was photographing in the street.
Yes.
So this title is perfect for him. And then in English, the publishers, Simon and Schuster, were thinking it was not enough as an advertising title. It was not enough a coup.
It was not clickbait, we would call it today.
Clickbait?
Clickbait.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was not clickbait. And decisive moment is an expression which is in the quote by Cardinal de Retz, 18th century French, that Cartier-Bresson has chosen to open the book. Il n'y a rien dans ce monde qui n'est un moment décisif. So they thought that maybe they should take this little part of the sentence as a title in America, the decisive moments. The problem with the decisive moment is that this expression is not false, but it's really narrow because there is not one decisive moment. There are hundreds, thousands of decisive moments. And also there is not the right moment. There is your brain, your memories, your thoughts, psychoanalysis, poetry, everything which goes into a photograph. It's not only the moment.
That's so true.
So Cartier-Bresson has been all his life called the famous photographer of the decisive moment. And he was not happy at all with that.
Yeah.
He was against it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always scratching the title of the book when he was signing to write something else instead of decisive moment. So that's funny because, of course, these three words, these decisive moments, those 3 words have been a kind of definition of the way of Cartier-Bresson was shooting, but it's absolutely against his wishes.
I like this story so much for a number of reasons, but one, because Cartier-Bresson was so much more, as you were saying, than capturing that moment. it was the totality of his life to that point in each and every photograph that this is what he saw.
Mm-hmm.
This is how he chose to frame it. Now, of course, as a member, founding member of Magnum, he was given assignments. So he didn't shoot just what he wanted to, although when he was younger...
This was just after the war, because
Yes.
Magnum was created in 47. What you see in this book, half of it is before 47. And it's probably where he has his best pictures. When he was traveling in the 30s, he was saying smelling, and renifler, and with no assignment, just traveling with friends and doing picture not as a métier, not as a job, but just as a mean of expressing himself.
Now that's interesting because before photography, he chose another medium to express himself.
He wanted to be a painter, like an uncle of his who encouraged him a lot.
Louis.
Yes, to become a painter, and he followed school in painting and things like that. In fact, he quickly abandoned painting, thinking he could become a filmmaker.
Yes, I love this intersection of cinema and still photography. It comes up again and again, and certainly that's what's happening right here, right now, because this will be going on YouTube.
And he left for Mexico. In Mexico, he happened to meet with Alvarez Bravo and also Paul Strand. Paul Strand went back to New York. Henrí went back to New York. And Paul Strand had created with other guys a company named Nikino, based on the Soviet try of
Soviet cinema.
Yeah, kind of cinema which was political and documentary cinema. And he taught Henrí how to make movies. And just before going back to Europe, Henri Cartier-Bresson made an album of his 60 best pictures, and he sent this album to Louis Buñuel and then to Jean Renoir. And Jean Renoir said to Henrí, "Oh, you are good, not bad. Come, you will become my assistant." So he was the assistant of Jean Renoir on 3 movies. He's even playing in those movies.
Speaking roles. Roles. I'm very impressed.
Little speaking role. And he made, at the same period, he made 2 films on the Spanish Civil War.
Yes.
For Nikino. And a little later, a film at the end of the Second World War on
for the American War Office.
Yeah. And finally decided that maybe cinema was too complicated because you had to have a big team and you have to work with too many people.
It's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was more difficult in those days.
Much more difficult.
And at the same period, the MoMA in New York, thinking he had died during the war, because as he escaped from a prisoner camp in Germany.
We should probably just step back a little bit. So in 1939 or 1940, he enlisted in the French army.
He was immediately taken as prisoner.
Not a very good soldier, I guess.
No. And 3 times he tried to escape. 3rd time was a good one. And when you have escaped, you have to hide yourself because you are an évadé. How do you call that? Somebody who has been escaping.
An escapee?
An escapee. So he's hiding himself. That's why MoMA thought he died during the war in captivity or somewhere. And they wanted to make a posthumous exhibition of his work. But finally, through his good friend David Seymour, Shin, Henri Cartier-Bresson heard about this project of an exhibition at MoMA, and he said, "Well, I'm so happy that, I'm still alive. So I have many pictures to propose to you. You must not only count on the pictures that were shown at Julien Levy before. I am coming with a new set of pictures, and we'll see." So he went to the States. So that's in the book Images à la Sauvette, where it divides. The second part begins there with America. And as the show is delayed over a year, he can travel in America. He can take time to make prints with his friend Shim. And just after the opening of his show, Magnum is created. Kappa, Shim, Vendiver, and Cartier-Bresson, who already was not there. He was leaving for Asia, where he stayed until 1951. And that's when he came back from Asia that the project of this book became really solid and serious.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because before World War II, Cartier-Bresson was the scion of a very affluent family in France, and he had the luxury of traveling and feeding his artistic ambitions. Mm-hmm. But it must have been the case that going through 3 years in a German prisoner of war camp and seeing World War II up and close, it must have changed. And it changed what he chose to focus on? Is that fair?
Yes, of course, obviously. Because before, he was really close to surrealist people. He was traveling like a dreamer, you know. And then 3 years in captivity, the war, it changed your brain. You have to be more concerned. You have to be more attached to defend some certain values. All this changes you. And that's the moment that Magnum was created. And Magnum, at the time, has this really good idea that it was to protect photographers, and that photographers were the owner of the company and their negatives belonged to them and not to the newspaper who was sending them somewhere. So that's how the notion of authorship became really serious.
Right.
Because a photographer, let's, for example, George Roger, who also created Magnum maybe 2 months after he joined the group. George Roger had been a photographer for Life magazine, and he photographed, for example, the opening of Bergen-Belsen camps and things like that.
Oh, wow.
But those pictures doesn't belong to him. They belong to Life magazine because he took them and he was paid by them. So the difference with Magnum is that a photographer at Magnum was asked if he wanted to do a story for Life, but he was owning his negatives.
This is so important, and it's so interesting because there's a very strong parallel with the film world when Charlie Chaplin and others created United Artists. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was artists
when was that?
Taking control of their destiny. That was in the 20s, I think. The 20s. United Artists. Mary Pickford, she was another one. Yeah. So very forward-thinking, very interesting. And I've read that although Cartier-Bresson was the Magnum photographer who went to Asia, it wasn't an obvious fit that he would be in Asia as opposed to other photographers, but because of his wife then, Ratna.
Yeah, she was from Javanese. She was a dancer. And I think she helped in getting some authorization to be able to stay there. But in fact, Cartier-Bresson was not at all a journalist, but he was kind of interested by decolonization, and he smelled that something could be interesting there. But you know, he left in end of 47, and he came back in 51, so it's a very long trip.
Yes.
It's very rare.
Yes. And of course, extraordinary things were happening at that time. Mm-hmm. The creation of communist China.
Yes, of course. The end of the Kuomintang.
Yes. Yeah. The Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. Yes. He was there for all of that. He knew Gandhi.
Because he was a good smeller.
He was a good smeller. But that's another thing about Bresson that really strikes me. We talk about the decisive moment. I've made the error, I will not make it going forward, of saying Cartier-Bresson decisive moment and that's it, like that's his brand. He was so much smarter than that, but it wasn't just intellect. It wasn't just an autodidact. He taught himself. He read Proust, which I've never read. It's apparently 1.3 million words, but we have Google and I did learn a little bit about it. It's fascinating. But he also was decisive, I think it's fair to say, in terms of meeting people, in terms of placing himself in these incredible circumstances. I read about a period when he was in Asia where they actually wanted to meet with communist Chinese. And if kidnap is not the right word, I'm not sure what is, but he became their guests for several months.
Mm-hmm. Not more than that, but it was a bit difficult. But, when he did this famous picture of the people queuing in China in front of the bank.
Yes, yes.
You see the composition is fantastic. And it's a huge event.
Yes. So, it strikes me as a convergence of three very different things. An artistic sensibility that he began with painting, a social awareness that began with being the product of affluence and at some level turning away from that. And then this commitment to simply showing up, which was not simple at all back in that day. And I understand he didn't like to fly.
No. And in fact, he didn't like to live for very short trips, like photographers generally do. Live for 2 days there, 3 days there. He hated that. Yeah. So that's why he stayed 3 years in Asia.
So, it's very wearing.
And a year in Mexico. And, this kind of trips he liked. Yeah. And not going for shooting one image. Because, when they created Magnum, he was almost 40. 39 exactly.
Old man.
And he already had 3 exhibitions in New York. 2 at Julian Levy Gallery, 1 alone, 1 with Walker Evans and Alvarez Bravo.
Incredible.
And 1 retrospective at MoMA. So when they created Magnum and he began to work for magazine, he was already an artist. He was already somebody that was referred as the great photographer Henrí Cartier-Bresson. So he could also decide a bit what he wanted to do. Even if in China, for example, he was obliged to do a few pictures in color because Life magazine wanted a few pictures in color.
Yes.
Yeah. But he never liked this picture. He never selected them for any book or any retrospective. We still have the slides, but we have no authorization to use them.
How interesting. One of the things that Cartier-Bresson has said any number of times is it's not about the equipment. I agree. And yet, it was this small little camera that allowed him to be inconspicuous in crowds, that in its day, with just a quick flip, was already on to the next exposure, whereas before that, it would be a speed graphic, 4x5-inch sheet film, one at a time. And I understand not only did he not like color, he resented that magazines, when he was commissioned to do color work, told him he had to have a much bigger camera.
Oh, I don't know.
The Plaubel Machina.
I don't know camera. Because this I'm not sure of. But sorry, but no, because it was not just at all his way of expressing himself. He liked color a lot with Bonnard or with Matisse. He knew those guys and he photographed them and he went to their atelier. So, his favorite painter was Paolo Uccello, and it's color. But in photography, he liked the black and white abstraction.
It's also wonderful because you mentioned Matisse. Matisse, of course, was the artist commissioned to do the
cover of the book.
And what's fascinating to me is the parallel nature. Matisse actually worked with, that was a montage. He literally would cut
cutting.
out. Yes.
Matisse cutting.
And in the 1920s, montage in photography was a big deal.
But at the end of his life, Matisse was doing a lot of cuttings, paper cuttings, also because he could not paint anymore. So he was doing cuttings.
And I understand that later in life, Cartier-Bresson returned to painting himself?
Yeah. Later in life, at the end of the 60s, he didn't want to do reportage anymore. So he told Magnum, you can still have my archive and distribute my archive, but I don't want to do assignment anymore. And because, in fact, he wanted to go back to drawing. And when I knew Cartier-Bresson in the 80s, he was every morning going to draw either in the Louvre, either in his atelier with models. And he keeps saying, I have so many things to learn. And he was almost 80.
Well,
so he was doing that until his death, in fact.
Curiosity is what drives us.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned going to the Louvre.
Mm-hmm.
Before we came on camera, you told me a little story about that because you were saying, yeah, he would go to the Louvre and draw. And I said, well, yeah, that was before it was crowded. And you had a rather interesting response to that. I wonder if you could share it.
As also because he was Cartier-Bresson, he knew a lot of people at the Louvre. And at the time, the Louvre was closed one day a week. I think it was Tuesday. Maybe it's still closed on Tuesday. I don't know. And he was capable of going when it was closed. And he was sometimes staying 2-3 hours in front of a painting he loved, drawing it, copying it.
With no one else.
With no one else, yeah.
To me, that is luxury.
Yeah, sure.
That is luxury. Yeah. Well, let's
but
talk.
Also, a person as known as he was, sometimes is not at all interested by painting. She would be more interested by, I don't know, cars or, things like that, or golf or tennis. Or he was interested by painting.
Yes, but he had that intellectual curiosity from early on, which is so interesting to me.
When he left for Africa in 1932, I think, he left for a year in Africa. And he left for Africa with 2 books, Sandra and Ulysses James Joyce, just translated into French. And he could read English pretty well. So, he left his 23, 24, with the 2 very important books of the time for a year in Africa.
Fantastic. The only people I know who would actually take the time to read books like that are my daughters.
Oh, yeah? Yes. Good for you. My daughters don't read.
I don't read like that anymore. Instead, I just get on the phone every morning.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I do. So I want to ask you what is probably a terrible question but I'm going to ask it anyway. And then I'm going to ask for your help in pronunciations.
Mm-hmm.
So the pronunciations that I want help with are 3 of my favorite. I'll tell you my favorites first.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Saint-Lazare? Salazar.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you guys know this, and we'll show it right now. It's the man jumping across.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
There is a big story about this picture.
Tell us the story, please.
When he left for New York to prepare his exhibition at MoMA, he made a scrapbook with 380 or 40 and 400 prints inside this album. So he printed himself those 400 prints.
He printed it himself.
Yes.
I understand he didn't like printing.
No, but it was the war, and he had to prepare a selection to show to the people at MoMA for his exhibition.
Okay.
So he took, I think, the boat with his scrapbook under his arm. So he had been editing all what he has been doing since the 30s to 1945 or 6. And he discovered this picture, Saint-Lazare, that was made in 32, but never printed, because it's a picture that he cropped. And Cartier-Bresson was somebody who was never cropping his pictures, because he was thinking that either the picture is good, either it's bad. But it's the eye, the mind's eye. So he didn't want to cut it and to try to do something else. But this picture, which is amazing, it took only 1, not 2, 1. There were a fence, and the length of his Leica could not go in between the 2 pieces of wood. So when he took the picture, there is a piece of wood appearing in the picture on the left side. So as he was not a cropping guy, it was not interesting. And then he looked at it again and saw that if he was cropping the picture, taking out the piece of wood, it would be a masterpiece. And it is a masterpiece.
It is.
And in the scrapbook, we did the publication of this scrapbook, we have the 2 versions. We have the version cropped and the version with no cropping.
I am fascinated by this because there is a school of thought that says the composition is the composition. That's it. I've read that he was much like that. And yet I know that this is not the only time that he cropped.
2-3 times.
And he also did something else, which I was not aware of until I went back in and started going through Henrí Cartier-Bresson, The Modern Century, which was the book coming out of 2010 MoMA retrospective.
MoMA, yeah.
There were two images. One of a woman, the camera is looking up at her, and her earrings have been removed from the shot.
Yeah.
And then there is, we would call that Photoshop today. And there is another shot of, I think it was a shirt hanging on a clothesline where he removed the clothespins.
Yeah, this was just his youngest tries in the surrealism period. And André Breton was needing pictures to illustrate an article in his magazine. So he said to everybody, do something for me with a piece of material. So it was like students at school trying to do things to illustrate an article for André Breton.
Fascinating.
So it's different because it was really experimentation.
Okay. So thank you, because now, having circled back, I know that it's Saint-Lazare.
Yes.
Another one of my absolute favorite photographs, and I actually don't remember the title of it. It begins with an H, is, of course, where he's shooting from above. There is a set of stairs, a black rail, and a bicycle as a blur coming around the corner. How is that pronounced?
Is a city in the south of France.
Okay. Well, you know what?
Small city.
I'm going to stop telling you about my favorites.
Okay.
But I am going to ask you about yours. Is that
I don't have.
You don't have?
No. Impossible.
Oh, fair enough.
Too many.
Fair enough. I understand. Well, a little bit about you before we sign off. How did you come to be the director of the Henrí Cartier-Bresson Foundation?
In fact, I spent 20 years at Magnum Photos. And I was kind of art director there. And most of my time there, I was in charge of Cartier-Bresson. Because Cartier-Bresson didn't want to have 20 people, that all the full team calling him every day because, do you agree with that? He wanted to have only one person, and I was that person. And when his wife, Martine Franck, also a Magnum photographer, decided to do this foundation, it was just a period in 2002 when I wanted to take a sabbatic year. And finally, the project I had for this sabbatic year fell down. And Martine Franck asked me if I wanted to help her with a foundation, let's say a week per month or something like that. So I said yes. And I didn't know if I wanted to go back to Magnum or to do something else. And Martine offered me to work at the foundation. They already had a director, Robert Delpire, the famous French publisher, but he was pretty old. He was almost 80, I think. And Martine knew that he will do that for the opening. And then, so I decided that I could be the deputy director for a few months and then become the director when he stops. And that's what happened. And for 15 years, I have been the director. For maybe 12 years with Martine Franck as president, and it was a fantastic collaboration. We created this foundation together, and it was great. And then since 3 months, I have decided to stop, to do a step back, and to become only the artistic director. And we have asked to François Hebel, that you met, good friend of mine, to become the director. So we work as a team now.
Well, on the one hand, it's sad, but on the other hand, it doesn't sound sad at all. It sounds exciting.
No, it's my decision and it's fine. No problem.
If you were the art director and now you're stepping back to be artistic director again, I'm guessing that you're an artist yourself.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think I'm very sensitive to artists. I grew up in a family of artists, and I'm interested by photography, but it is not what I'm interested in the most. I much prefer literature or painting than photography. But it happens that in photography, I have knowledge quite serious since 30 years.
I would say.
But,
yes.
But you know, I think it's good not to be focused on one medium.
They inform each other, do they not?
Yeah.
What kind of literature do you enjoy?
Many. Proust, of course.
Yes. Yes.
I read it from the beginning to the end. It took me 3 years, but I read it.
I was going
completely.
to ask.
Yeah.
Was it worth it?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
It's said that it is the greatest novel ever written. Certainly the longest, twice as long as Dr. Zhivago.
I don't know. I have no idea, but it's a very long process. It's a life thing, But no, I read many kinds of literature. I'm a teacher in philosophy, in fact, at the beginning, and I'm very much interested also in theoretical texts.
Interesting.
And I'm going to be the director of a collection of textbooks in France soon.
Beautiful.
So, because for me, reading is something very important.
I understand. Well, Agnes, thank you so much for sitting
You're
down
welcome.
with us. What a privilege. What a pleasure.
You tell me when I can see that.
Yes,
Will
I
be
will.
good.
I will. For Three Blind Men and an Elephant, I'm Hugh Brownstone here with Agnes Sire, now the soon-to-be stepping back artistic director of Henrí Cartier-Bresson Foundation. See you next time. Stop futzing with the thing.
I was thinking I had to take it out.
This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From custom domains to beautiful websites using their easily customizable templates that you can have up and running in minutes, e-commerce, email and email marketing, SEO, analytics, and scheduling, Squarespace does it all and has done it for us for the last 11 years. If you are a small to mid-sized business in any industry, Squarespace is the place to go for all of your website needs. Hop over to www.squarespace.com/Hugh for a free trial. And if you like what you see and want to move forward, receive 10% off your first order by using the discount code Hugh at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace.